Hi everyone, welcome back to The Mystic in the Woods. I'm Kate, and today we're going to be talking about my favorite goddess decks and how I read with them. So this video is going to be about goddess compilation decks, the decks where we have numerous goddesses or divine feminine figures within the same deck, not decks dedicated to a specific goddess like the Isis Oracle or the Kali Oracle or something like that. That would be a separate video, so let me know if you want that. Now, two other things before we get started. First, I'm using a different camera setup, so hopefully this is going to work out well. And second, just disregard the paint that you may see on my hands or potentially even in my hair. We're in the middle of a painting project here, so it is what it is. Alright, so I have 4 decks on this list, because if you've been following the channel for a while, then you know that my Divine Feminine Oracle is one of my favorite Oracle decks, because it was my first Oracle deck. I find it to be a very versatile deck, probably because I've had it for so long, so there's almost nothing I can't do with it. We'll talk about that in a minute. I do have a full review of this on the channel if you want to see that. Now, the reason that I bring that up is because I only have 4 of these types of decks in my collection. Because I love the Divine Feminine Oracle so much, when I consider bringing another like goddess or Divine Feminine like deck into my collection, it has to offer me something that makes me actually believe that I'm going to reach for it over the Divine Feminine Oracle at least sometimes, in order for me to actually bring it into my collection. So these decks, I have 4 of them, and I use them all quite differently. So we're just going to start with, we'll just start with this one and we'll go from there. So this is the Goddess Knowledge cards. And again, different camera setup, so we're going to see how this goes for us. This deck I use only for altar cards. That is the only reason that I use this deck. I have never like shuffled and pulled from it for any particular reason. I suppose that I might if I was working with a client and we were trying to, you know, identify which face of deity is coming forward, and I had a really intuitive pull to grab this deck. But as of right now, I've really only ever used it for altar cards because I think that they're beautiful. So this is Diana, for example, and on the back, there's a really great, just like little synopsis, right, of who the goddess is and her story. And there's quite a few different representations in this deck, and they're all in an art style that I love. So I won't even try to say this name, but I will show it to you. It may be showing up backwards for you guys. If it is, I apologize for that. But here's Bast. This one is Spider Woman. Hera. Here's Athena. So we do have Athena and Diana showing up as 2 separate faces of deity, which we don't always see in our decks. And I just want to find one particular image for you. So here's Lady of the Lake. Oops, upside down. I just want to show you a couple. So here's one. So here's, for example, Mary, the Mother Mary, the Virgin Mary from the Christian pantheon. And this image of her is very different from how we normally see her depicted, right? Like, this is an art style that is different. This is a color palette that is different. Everything about this is different. And so I have found that for altar cards, for my aesthetic and for how, for the art styles that I like, this has been my go-to for altar cards. Okay. So then let's talk about the European Goddesses and Spirits Oracle deck. Just as a quick side note, today is the 27th as I'm filming this. This is on Kickstarter, I believe, until the 30th, and I backed it. So Joanna sent me this deck so that I could review for you guys. And I actually backed it on Kickstarter because, like, the stretch goals have been met, you know, like the cardstock and the edging and the whatever. So here's the backing. And this deck has turned out to be very versatile in my collection. For me, oh, excuse me, sorry about that notification there that popped up. This is probably going to outperform my Divine Feminine Oracle for versatility. It's just newer in my collection still. Now, one of the things I really love about this deck is that it's the only deck in this whole list where I can understand something about the goddess or the spirit just by the art, right? So like this is I wouldn't even try to say her name, but this is obviously a very different personality and myth and story than this. Okay, there's this is the only goddess compilation deck I have ever worked with or seen that helps me to understand who the figure is based on the artwork. That tells me something about her myth and her story beyond just symbols. In a really beautiful way. Now, along with that, I have used this deck for daily draws, to pull for my students and my clients. This deck has got excellent journal prompts in it. And one of the things that I love about this deck, so again, I use these all differently, okay? This deck is an excellent daily draw deck. It's actually proving very solid for shadow work, especially to towards the end of a shadow work session, to offer you insight into what's next. So for example, when I'm working with students and we're doing a shadow work session, at the end of it we pull some cards. This deck really says, okay, here's what you've learned, right? Like, this is what you discovered within that meditation, and here is something to think about to pull it into your daily life. This deck, the smaller guidebook that comes with it, is really great. You don't get a ton of information, but the way that she speaks about the goddesses and the spirits in this deck, and the way that she explains their story and interweaves it with a message, it really, out of all the decks in my collection, it really helps me to see how, or to ask me, how does this goddess's story, how do the characters in this story and the themes and the lessons in this story apply to what you are going through right now? And then it has the journal prompts to help you pull even more from that. And when we are working with a goddess deck like this, where we have a whole compilation of goddesses, like in all the decks I'm going to talk about here, there are a lot of ways that you can use this deck, right? These decks. So of course, like this one I use for altar cards, but any of these, you could pull from to see what face of deity is connecting with you, okay? You could pull from for a message, depending on how the guidebook is written. But they all, in some way, include the story and the myth associated with that particular figure. And this deck does a really good job of inviting you and showing you how that myth and archetype and story and lesson can apply to what you are going through now. And our soul, our unconscious, however you want to describe that aspect of you, really is fed on stories and myths and symbols and archetypes and things like that. And so when the patriarchy kind of came through and took away our myths that are aligned with the divine feminine, we really lost something more significant than a lot of us realize on a surface level, as far as our ability to understand ourselves, to see ourselves in story. And this deck really helps you to do that in a really beautiful way. And of course, it is Northern Europe, or I shouldn't even say Northern, it's just European goddesses and spirits. And as somebody of, various European descent, who is actively and currently trying to connect more with that ancestry, this deck is also a really powerful tool for that. So here's Saradwin. I'll just show you a couple more. Here's Frigg. So I have been I really love this deck, and I'm really excited for the Kickstarter version to come to me. So anyway, I love it enough to have backed the Kickstarter, even though Joanna sent me a copy. It does also, there's the option to purchase with this deck the companion book. I don't think you need this book in order to read with the deck, okay? The small white book that comes with it is really solid. The messages are fantastic. But this companion book is really great. So you get more information about you get more information, more messages, you get correspondences and ways and ideas in which to connect with that face of deity, to like deepen your practice with them. Love this book as well. Okay, so next. Let's do the Witches of Legend. So I also have the Witches of Legend Oracle deck in my collection here. And I should mention, like, these are in no particular order of favorites because they use them all so differently. Now, this deck, first of all, we could talk about this for a second. I love this backing. Now, I don't know if she did this on purpose or not. I would have to read the guidebook again to see if it's in there. But this is, you know, I love this backing because it's very much like a lantern type of a deal. And one of the ways that we can look at decks like this is, you know, and this leads us into the conversation of like soft polytheism versus hard polytheism. It doesn't really matter, right? As far as this conversation is concerned. I heard, I believe it was Demelza Fox speaking on a podcast. She was being interviewed. And she was talking about priestesses, but I think that this applies to faces of the goddess as well. That divine energy is the same electricity or the same light shining through different light fixtures. So if you think about how different light fixtures work, how they shine light, how a Christmas light versus a laser versus a spotlight versus a flashlight or overhead lights or my ring light that I'm using right now. They're all variations of the same light that goes through them. But as they come through a different light fixture, they present differently. They do different things. They set a different ambiance. They have a different energy. They help you accomplish different things. A laser, like a pen laser, is not going to help me when what I need is a flashlight. All right, sorry about my dogs are being a little barky today. One of the ways we can work with decks like this is we don't have to take it literally that, like, when I pull this card that Morgan Le Fay is specifically reaching out to me. You can. That is one way to use this. But you can also take Morgan Le Fay's energy and story as a message from whatever guides or goddesses you do work with, as an energy or a message from them shining through this type of light fixture. Okay, so anyway, let's talk about this deck. This deck, the messages in the guidebook are solid but short, so let me just open this up for you guys and show you this. So here's Diana. There's a quick meaning, and then there's a myth. I do really like that there's a spot for notes. I will be actually taking advantage of that shortly. This deck, though, while the messages are good, and I do find that I can kind of use this deck as like a clarifier sort of a deck because the messages are shorter and a little to the point there. I actually use this energetically to see how I need to have energy moved or severed or changed within a shadow work session. And whether that be for myself or for a client when I'm pulling cards during a client session. So here's Persephone. I really like this image of Persephone. And this, I have used this as altar cards as well because I do really love the art here. But when I'm doing a shadow work with a student or a client, one of the things we're doing is healing things on an energetic level. So we're cutting cords, we're there's kind of a lot of we're working with your guides, but there's a lot of energy work that can happen. And so this deck allows me to see how we need to do that healing on an energetic level in conjunction with their guides. So if we look at a deck or a card like, I'm going to find a couple that are like fairly straightforward here. So if we have, Kali coming in versus the energy on this card, these are two very different energies, especially if you think about the gold and the black sort of smoky edges as energy that is moving through the cards, okay? Here's Saradwin. So that's how I use this deck. And you don't have to use these decks like I use these decks. This is just how I use them. But this is how I've been using this deck, and it's been a really, really powerful tool. So it's one of the decks that sits on my desk pretty much all the time. So that it's right at my fingertips when I'm working with students to be able to pull into a session at any point. Okay, so then the final deck on my list is the Divine Feminine Oracle. And again, these are not like in any particular order. I am still the most attached to this deck, but because I use them all so differently. I wouldn't say that it's like the top of the list, okay? But again, I have a full review of this deck if you want to see it. So here's the backing, which I absolutely love. This deck was designed, let me see, what does she say here on the back? Because this deck is really about, I've heard her speak about this, and she really, Megan Watterson, was looking for it. It doesn't really have the description on the back. Trying to create a deck that was very much about the various faces of divine feminine energy and the way that they embody love. And yes, for that reason, I suppose you could label this as a hug deck or an affirmational deck. And that is one way to use that. So even here's Kali. I don't particularly love this depiction of Kali, but there she is. So the mother of the universe, each card has a title, and then I release all that doesn't serve me. It's time to be the truth of who I am. That is absolutely Kali, right? That statement. But it's a little bit softened, I think is what I want to say there. So then here is, let me just find ones that, like, here's Saraswati. Saraswati, I can never say her name quite right. The essence of who I am flows effortlessly into everything I create. Pope Joan, the possibilities are limitless because the soul is limitless. Marguerite Perrette, love is divine, I am nothing except love. So you can, and I do, use this deck as like an affirmational deck at the end of a session, especially either when you need really gentle energy or at the end of a shadow work session to kind of wrap it up and put you into a, especially if you're working through something really challenging, right? To kind of bring in that affirmation at the end. Now, this guidebook has, so here's, let me just, okay, so here's Lakshmi. The goddess of abundance. I choose to feel abundant wealth as an inside job. We have a who she is, so this is about her story. Then we have a when your soul selects the card, so that's the message. And then there is a soul voice meditation and an intention for each card. So this soul voice meditation, when do I feel the most abundant? And that can be used as a meditation. She talks about how she does soul voice meditations in here. You can also use it as a journal prompt. I've done both. You can also pull more cards off of it. I've done that as well. Now, again, one way to pull from this deck is in a affirmational sort of way. Here's Inanna. But I actually find this deck to be very versatile. I use it as a clarifier. I use it to bring another, like a layer of messaging into its spread, which I also do with the European Goddesses and Oracles, so, or Spirit, the European Goddesses and Spirits Oracle. So I'll pull like 2 or 3 tarot cards and an oracle card to create the entire message. I will do that with both of these decks. I will use this during shadow work. Here's Joan of Arc. Because I actually find light decks to be very powerful for shadow work, and I'm going to do a whole video on that. So I use this deck for everything. But part of the reason that I can use this deck for everything is because I've had it literally the longest of any deck in my collection. And so I'm very connected with it, I'm very familiar with it, and I have a good relationship with it. So I can really use this deck for anything in my practice. I understand that might not be the case for everybody. So I will talk more in a separate video though about using like these lighter or these affirmational decks in shadow work, because I actually think they have a really strong place even outside of that affirmational pull at the end, which is really valuable. Don't get me wrong on that either. Okay, so that's kind of, these are the 4 decks in my collection. So I have the Goddess Knowledge cards that I use for altar cards personally, or I do love the information on the back of the card, so I will often just flip through to find the goddess that I'm looking for information on. I have the Witches of Legend, which again, I use more to read how energy needs to be moved in a session, which is a little different, but it is what it is. The Divine Feminine Oracle that I use for everything, literally. You can go see the full review on that to learn more about it, and I will have a video coming up about how to use decks like that in shadow work. And then I have the European Goddesses and Spirits Oracle, which I really do think is the most versatile one in this collection. as I get to know it more. I just don't have the depth of relationship and familiarity with it that allows it to be as versatile as the Divine Feminine, and there are no keywords or phrases on it. We just have the name, which for me decreases the versatility of it. However, because so much of the character of the spirit is right there, I think I've showed you guys those ones. Because so much of the, I'm going to use the word personality of the goddess or spirit in question is right there in the card. I do think eventually this is going to be even more versatile than my Divine Feminine for me as I become more familiar with it. So if you would like to learn more about any one of these decks, let me know. I'm happy to do a full review. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Bye.